good people, and welcome back to season 2 of Conversations with Beloved Kindred. I am Dr. Grace Gipson, assistant professor in African American Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University.
And I am Dr. Kaniqua Robinson, assistant professor of anthropology at Furman University in Greenville.
Yes. All right, we are back. Did y'all miss us? We missed you all. So we wanted to make sure, that we didn't leave y'all hanging for too long. We got some more for you. We got some new stuff. We got some, throwbacks that we want to pull out here for you. But before we dive into this new season, just want to give a little background to our new listeners and our new folks that are tuning in about the series. So, and a refresher to our already existing fans. So, Conversations with Beloved and Kindred is a web series that is hosted by myself and Dr. Robinson, who we consider ourselves to be, two Black feminist creatives in this, this world of the academy and in this world of outside of the academy also.
Right.
So, yes. And so with each episode in Conversations with Beloved and Kindred, myself and I'll call her sometimes Dr. Robinson, or I may call her Kaniqua. We're gonna alternate.
It's going to be interchangeable.
Yes, very much so. We're going to talk about creative works, whether it's literature, whether it's film, television, and art, and the ways that they are grounded and how they're grounded in the Black experience. And so we are following in the footsteps of two amazing legends, Toni Morrison and Octavia Butler, who sought to fill in the gaps of Black history by reimagining supernatural Black past and present, and also giving voice to those many, many silenced narratives. So we wanted to, as up and coming scholars and growing scholars in the field, and, bring in those influences from Toni Morrison and Octavia Butler, but then even amplify others and add to that. And so this season, so if you all remember last season, we focused on Lovecraft Country as well as various other films. But this season, we're just focusing all on horror. That's it. We got back to back horror films that we are bringing to you. And so what better way to kick it off than with the 2019 documentary, Horror Noir, A Black History of Black Horror, and the 1973 film, Ganja and Hess. So let's dive right on in.
So first I want to just say, because I'm going to get very hyped, horror genre is my favorite. I love it. It brings so much joy to me. So the first question I have for you, Grace, or Dr. Gipson, which is going to be Grace from now on, that was great. What was your first horror film? Your very first experience with horror genre, or your first horror film?
Yeah, so it was Chucky and not Night of the Living Dead. I keep thinking about that film, but Chucky and Nightmare on Elm Street. Those were how I got, knowing about horror and, scary movies. And those, as a young kid, watching both of those, especially Chucky, I look at dolls very differently now. They're not the same. It's not the same anymore. And Nightmare on Elm Street, it was just this constantly, always when I went to sleep, looking at the ceiling and I hope nothing comes down, or anywhere else for that matter. So yeah, those were my two kind of introductions in, but I would definitely learn a lot more about it. Yeah. What about you?
I'm gonna go back to your, first of all, Nightmare on Elm Street is so amazing, because even if you look around you, it doesn't matter. Once you go to sleep, he's in your dreams. It's beautiful. It's a well done story. Even though Freddy is a bad person, he's a very awful character. His background is just he was a pedophile, was bad. The way he scared people, you can't escape him. You gotta fall asleep. Beautiful. My first, I would say Nightmare on Elm Street as well, but also Poltergeist.
Oh yes, that's
my movie.
Exorcist. Oh, that one too.
Okay. I mean, that was good. The Poltergeist, though,
yeah,
it was so amazing, because I appreciated. I guess back then I didn't really care about the story, but it's the fact that they were living above a burial ground.
Right.
And it really speaks on, these unidentified burials, these, the fact that even with, Black experience and how historically we have many unidentified burial grounds that we're right now trying to work through. And
Yes.
Poltergeist was about, the fact that this building, this house was on the burial ground, on the Native American burial ground. And it's like, that's what y'all get, move. But it was well done. So that was my first one, and Tales from the Hood. That's, and we're gonna talk about that later, but that is what made me scared of dolls.
I can definitely see how that would be the case. That, I think, was my first, I'll say, experience with Blackness and horror, was Tales from the Hood.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like horror, scary movies, just general, and then there's like the inserting of Blackness into horror, and keeping them, as we'll discuss, it wasn't like Tales from the Hood was the first time that we see Black people in horror.
Right.
So many other films before that, but it wasn't until I got older that kind of like got introduced to me. But yeah, that would be my first time that Blackness and horror, came together.
Right, because there weren't many horror films. Well, for me, I didn't see many horror films with Black characters except Candyman and Tales from the Hood at that time. But then, I come to find out that Blade is actual horror film. I wasn't quite sure. I didn't know it was horror. I thought it was just a nice film. But this really goes into even our conversation on, Black noir, like, really understanding what does it mean when you have Black people in these different angles or engagement with the horror genre. And so let's talk about Black Noir, the documentary.
Yes. So I remember actually watching this again, because I had watched it a while ago, but then watching it again on Halloween of last year, because Amazon Prime was doing this whole thing of like, here's all these horror films that you can watch for Halloween. And that happened to be one of the ones that they were showing. I was like, what a better way to celebrate Halloween than to watch horror noir. Like, yeah, this is like, this works.
It works.
So, yeah, came out in 2019. And it debuted when it debuted, and was directed by Xavier Bergen, and it's also based on the 2011 book of a very similar name, Horror Noir, Blacks in America, Horror Films from the 1890s to Present, from Dr. Robin R. Means Coleman. Let me make sure I get out. Who is a Black woman horror scholar. So which falls right in line to what, we're talking about with, influenced by Octavia Butler and Toni Morrison, who both have had their taste in writing horror,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Would you say Beloved is a horror?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Movie book, yeah.
For sure. No doubt.
Which again is why horror works for when you talk about the Black story. And it really starts with, what does race feels like, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first we need to define what is horror. Like, how will we define horror? So, there's multiple definitions, but one of the main definitions actually comes from Kendall R. Phillips in his work, Projected Fears, Horror Films and American Culture, where he defines it as anything that's marked as horrifying, anything that is considered horrifying or horrific. And it also is something that a genre that focuses on stories that bring dread or fear of any kind. So first we want to, start with that definition, because what brings fear? What is considered horrifying to the Black experience? And the documentary really talks about this particular, what is fear? Is it something that scares us, or really talks about our fears outside of the film process? But we're going to go into detail now. So let's break down the documentary a bit. Like, I'm excited. It's so much, because I really, this documentary, so much. So let's break it down.
Horror, y'all. Let's just put it out there. She loves horror.
Like, I don't even know. Like, I love everything about it. So, one thing I want to ask, what are your thoughts on horror as a main avenue to talk about Black history? Let's start with that before we go into the breakdown.
So it's one of the most creative ways, and probably the most understudied and not talked about genres of how to talk about Black history. I think some people are very literal in thinking, how do we talk about Black history, and fail to realize a genre like horror really actually can do a really good job of doing it. I mean, there's trauma in Black history. There's trauma and horror, Black horror.
Mhm.
There's happiness, there's survival, there's
Yeah.
joy in Black history as well as in horror, even though there is this fear, but in many ways, there's also kind of like the survival, there's a joy, it's a unique way of that. But I think it's a very creative way that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think it's underestimated, the value of how it can discuss Black history. And, if you think about how like the documentary brings up Birth of a Nation,
Mhm.
that in itself is horror and
Right.
towards Black folks,
Exactly.
without even including Black people in the actual movie itself.
Right.
Which,
Exactly.
So
I think that's key. Mhm.
yeah. So just the idea of we've always been fascinated as Tananarive do, with horror, but it ain't always loved us back, It
Right.
ain't
It has not. No.
not necessarily been on our team all
Mhm.
the time. So yeah.
And just like in that, nuances of what horror can do. I think horror really brings a unique perspective to the Black experience. Like you said, we're multiple. We have joys, we have sadness, we have fear, we have, triumphs. But I feel like, specifically in regards to horror, from my perspective, I think it does a great job in really articulating our fear. As Black people, yes, we have a good time and we know joy is resistance, but there are times when we're actually scared of what's going on around us as Black Americans in this white America. So when you talk about movies like Get Out, even Tales from the Hood, fantastic movie, FYI. When you talk about these different things, they're really speaking of, for example, in Tales from the Hood, the fear of the criminal justice system, the fear of police officers. Or when you talk about Get Out, simply like they spoke about in the documentary or mentioned in the documentary, a Black man walking down the street at night.
Right.
That is scary. We would never. We would never. But again, it's like it was a great way to articulate the fear, because in Get Out, the fear was actualized.
Right.
And so I think it does a great job depicting our experiences from this aggressive way. Like, look, we're scared. It doesn't mean that we don't have joys again and this, other ways of living and being, but this is what we're talking about when we tell you that we're scared of this particular institution or these multiple institutions that are involved in racism in America.
Yes, and to add to that, I also feel like horror has been a way for Black people to tell you, like for us to tell people like what's really going on and how we really feel. Like there'll be moments where you can any Black conversation, when you're watching a horror movie and you look and you're like, why did she go that way? Like, why did you open that door? And these are that we're like, this is a reality for us.
Exactly.
These are fictionalized stories that are on a screen. There's truth to it, because we're sitting here saying Black people would never do that. They would never do that.
Never do that.
Why? And and I know we've all been done this. We're talking to the screen. Where you going? Get up. Run the other way.
Yes.
So, because of that fear, even as we take on the fear of what's really actually happening, in films. So it's this fictional reality, if we could, say that or create that term.
Yeah.
For Black people, like we are just trying to tell y'all like what's been going on, but you don't want to listen to us.
Right. When we say we don't want to walk down the street at night by ourselves, that we, rather leave in the daytime, that we don't want to hang out at night in unfamiliar areas. Like when we say that, look at Get Out, you'll get an idea of why we say that.
And we're not just trying to be funny. We're not trying to be difficult. We're like being serious about our lives, because our lives are being taken from us so easily and so violently and so ruthlessly that any moment we can escape, and keep our, our dignity and our lives intact, we're doing that.
Yeah. And then when you think about horror being in this fictional way, it allows us to even comment on our experiences. Just like you said, don't go there, don't do this, don't do this. It's almost like a way for us to say we can finally speak to it in a different way. So it's both and multiple. That's why I love horror. Well, I love horror for multiple things. I love to be scared. It's a long story. But when you think about horror noir, it's about this whole idea of this is how we live our lives. At times, we move in a very strategic way for safety and out of fear. So how do we depict that? Horror has been a great avenue for that, a great way for us to show this is what we feel. This is what we experience today and historically, and possibly will continue to experience. And so one thing about horror noir, it breaks this down into like 3 points. One, it begins with Black people being depicted in movies that are not necessarily horror, but how Black people are depicted. And so Black people are scared of those movies. Mm-hmm. So one example of that, to pretty much elucidate the point, Birth of a Nation, like you mentioned earlier, and how in Birth of a Nation, it was this fear of this Black man is going to take this white woman, then he was killed, and it was like this emergent. First of all, he was a white person in blackface. And it was this film that was really created and supported the reemergence of the KKK, which was, to protect the white woman from these beastful Black men.
Allegedly beastful.
Allegedly, the stereotypical trope.
Right.
And so even in that conversation, when Black people saw this, it was like, so you're generating fear of Black people in this movie, and we're looking at the KKK, like, we're during the time of this film, lynchings were going on. Like mass killings of Black people was active, right? It was, so when this film came up in the way it did, it led to a lot of fear, and it's considered a cinematic classic.
Yeah. It's hard for me to even put that in and grasp that a cinematic classic, this fear, inducing film.
Right.
That, the president at the time basically was, showed it at the White House. Like he felt this was worthy enough to, show to everybody, to the masses here. Like this was just this great, film that we all need to be taking part in.
Right.
And just the idea of, I think even this kind of like white savior complex that was going on. Mm-hmm. Look, y'all, let's show y'all what we have to do to protect ourselves from these beastly people, so that they don't take over, or it's, get rid of us. You understand?
Them under control.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you have one of the most powerful people in the world, the president, glorifying this film,
right,
more fearful, because you're like, okay, so you don't even think that I'm worthy enough to exist. You don't even see me.
Exactly.
I'm less than, even to you.
Exactly. And that was the key, because even in that same film, you saw this fragile white woman. And then how, we think about throughout historically, it's like many deaths of Black men began with the fragile white woman issue, or the fragile white woman, this particular issue. And that was was there, but the way the film continued to depict this fragile white woman, and how, again, we see how it happened in history, it scared Black people, because we saw this. We saw, what was going on. And then also in Black Noir, they talked about King Kong.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how, it was depicted as, it was this Black person. Well, it wasn't a King Kong was an animal, clearly, but it was a figure, to represent Black people.
Right, like this animal, this ape, mm-hmm. which many people saw Black people as and derived from, mm-hmm. This was symbolizing Black folks and how they were just terrorizing, and how they were wanting to not get rid of, but scare white women, that they wanted to, rape them, that they wanted to, be this violent.
Yes.
To an animal. So now we, there's moments of we're like in Black, white people are in blackface depicting us, but then we get moved to an animal. So we're not even a person anymore. Our depictions have moved from human to animal.
Right. And again, you brought up this fragile white woman. Again, King Kong takes her away, and he's endangering her. And again, it's a horror film, but it's not categorized as horror, because even horror is subjective, right? And so, but even in those moments, you see how the Black engagement with horror films were different than what, traditionally we would consider horror. And another point that was brought up by the documentary, which I think is great, is Black actors in the films, Black actors. And I love how in the documentary, many of them, not just one person, talk about this experience in a complex manner, right? So when you think of, okay, now you have, I think one of them was, first of all, the stereotypical roles that we just depicted. But the other one was, okay, well, why are you playing in these movies? They're, stereotypical, type roles, and you shouldn't do this. But they were like, we have to have a job. And so I appreciate how she really brought that in, or how the documentary really brought that in from multiple perspectives. Like, we have to talk about the practicality of them just needing a job and what that meant to these actors who did not have many opportunities.
Right. And the fact that because there was so many limited opportunities, these were what they had to kind of take on. And that also we have to speak to the fact that many of these actors that are depicted in these films are actually speaking in the documentary. So they're speaking to their experience in this theater style, which I really appreciated, because it wasn't just someone talking about their roles. It was the people who played the role tell you how they felt at the time, what they were perceived as, and why, like you said, why they took on the roles.
Right.
So that was really important and added depth to the documentary, actually having the people who played many of these seminal, roles.
And I think that's critical to even the social science discipline in our research. And, even as a Black feminist, or as Black feminists ourselves, it's important to let the people speak about their own experiences. So the fact that this documentary allowed, like, hey, we could talk about them as whatever, like, this is what I felt when I did this. This is why I did this. This is why it's important to me. Yes, I do understand that I may have been a sidekick or whatever, but I got some money at that time that I needed. I could pay my bills. Also, it really spoke to representation. I didn't see a lot of people like me there. So when I was able to get in that genre, it was amazing. And again, the opportunities were limited. So it wasn't simply about, I want this to, I want to play into these stereotypical roles. It was really about, I'm just happy I have a job. And I'm happy that I'm able to show that, yes, we're here, we exist. And, so I think that was a great way to really talk about the actors and to bring agency to the actors through this documentary. Because it's important that we don't, make them as passive as some of their roles made them.
Right.
And so,
and even in those roles, I think it's important to speak to the type of roles that were.
Yes, talk about that.
So, and there were a few cases where Black people were seen as scientists, which is a role that often is not given to Black folks, like, just period. Even still today, when you think about it, like, it's very rare to find Black people in these scientist roles. Or, and if we are, they're seen as maniacal, they're seen as mad scientists, and not necessarily like someone who's actually does good in their work. So
who's a Black scientist in the film today?
So Angela Bassett plays a scientist in a Green Lantern film, although the Green Lantern was horrible, but she plays a Black scientist in that. We can also look at in the Captain Marvel movie, because if we're looking at maybe scientists or in the field of science, technology, Monica Rambeau. Yeah. So there are some, and it's escaping me, other characters, but yes, if we're looking at STEM as a whole,
right.
We do see not a lot still, but there, a few. But it is. But then you have the example like, oh God, there's got to be one. I can't think of a specific name, but we've been pinned as, like I said, these mad scientists. Lawrence Fishburne in Ant-Man. He plays a well-known scientist, Black scientist. That's also a professor at Berkeley. So there are ways to depict, but like I said, the fact that we're sitting here struggling to try to figure out who they are speaks to the necessary need.
And it's very interesting that they're all in these particular genre of movies. Like,
Very much.
It's almost like we are only seen in this sci-fi fantasy type movies, but we don't see that in other type of genres. But like you said, one of the roles that we did see historically in a horror is, the Black woman who was a scientist. And she was actually, we'll talk about directors in a second, but she was directed by, was it Oscar Micheaux? Was that? Yeah, like that was his film. And that was really the first that we start seeing Black women scientists in this way. So that was beautiful in itself.
And speaking of Oscar Micheaux, like as a Black director, he was like, okay, look, we're not about to be playing these roles that make us look beneath and under. Like we about to play people that look good, that are presentable, that are respected. And in many ways that might stir in some respectability politics in there. But at the time, he was like, we can't look like fools. We can't look like, animals. We need to be people that are given the respect that we are due. And we need to be seen as credible.
Right.
I can respect Oscar Micheaux for what he was presenting at the time when that was not even existent.
Right.
But definitely there's the critique in that of like, so what is deemed respectable and what is seen as presentable. So
and that does make a point. It's a bit of a segue when we talk about respectability politics at that time versus now. Like the social and cultural context was different. So yes, it does, spew respectability politics. Yet at that time when we were, given the roles that, passive roles, inferior roles, that we were thought of as animals in films, the respectability may have been warranted as a counter, an extreme counter to this narrative. But it was a way to say, hey, we're humans in our complexities as well. And we're not animals to be feared. We're not, beings who just prey on whiteness. That's not what we do. But we're actual humans, and we have multiple classes. So I think, even when we think about respectability, that's a very interesting conversation because it is something that we could discuss with some of the historical films. And it's also important to talk about the social and cultural context of what respectability meant then. So yeah, that was very good.
Right. And so to kind of add a little bit more to that, it makes me think about certain films like Eve's Bayou, and there's another one, it's slipping me, but particularly Eve's Bayou, where Black women are presented, in a particular way, and how some people have really taken the role of Black women in spirituality, who practice voodoo, who practice different West African religions, and really taken that to the far left.
Right.
Demonized it. And so, what I like, Eve's Bayou, which was written by a Black woman, directed by a Black woman, I think definitely can be considered a horror film. We're going to talk about it more later in the series, but just that was an example, I think, for me, where the representation of Black women in horror really shined.
Right.
Young to old, because there was youth that were, that are in this film, and then there's the older, that are presented. And so, Black women in horror haven't necessarily always been given their just due either. We've been seen as sexual objects. We've been seen as just simply, a doorstep for you to step on. We've been seen as voodoo priestess. We've been seen as, the girl who gets in the way and then ultimately sacrificed. So we haven't necessarily been all that looked on greatly in the so
I like that, the girl who gets in the way.
I think it's important that we definitely stress that, because Black men were getting roles. But Black women, even when they were very minimal, to say the least, and sometimes not even talking.
Right.
So I think just their presence is even more of a discussion that needs to be had, and which I appreciated that it was based off of this Black woman's book, that the documentary, that we're talking about.
Exactly. I do agree. And even like when you talk about the different tropes of women, and you said the person who gets in the way, it also is like, that Black character who sacrificed themselves for the white character. That was one of the tropes they talk about in the documentary, where it's like, you're there as the sacrificial lamb. Like, you sacrifice your life so that these white people can survive. It's like, what?
Not mine.
Not mine now. I'm just gonna go because I'm just gonna sacrifice myself. But again, you know, we were there, but again, what was our role? What are some of the stereotypes that we had to experience in these particular roles? But again, it was a very powerful thing. And there was another stereotype that was important in regards to that.
The final girl was a recreation of basically She's Still Standing. And so Jada Pinkett is one of the first examples of the final girl. I think it was a Halloween, one of those later Halloween movies that she's in, and she gets to be the final girl, meaning like, I'm still standing. I'm the last person standing here.
Yes. Didn't she get in Scream? She was in Scream, right?
She was in Scream. That's what it was, the final girl. Thank you. That's the correct film.
She survived? She survived Scream?
Yeah, I think so. Or was it Halloween that she survives?
I don't know.
Oh man. Well, let's put it like this. She survives. There's one of them, whether it's Scream or whether it's Halloween, where she survives. Where she's called the final girl.
Right.
Because the director, I believe it's Eric Dickerson, was speaking to that, and how like it kind of really flips the script. Because you know, we're always like, so when we dying, like one of the actors, Miguel Nunez, even says, like, I counted how many pages.
Yes.
See. And that's like, so it's funny, but it's sad because like I'm sitting here literally trying to figure out how long I got.
I got about 5 good pages that I need to act. But even that, it's like Tanana Reeve do, and also Dr. Coleman even talked about, like, yeah, you know, some of us may die first, but it's almost a myth because many of us live because of that final girl type syndrome, not syndrome, but it's trope. But also, what was that?
The red shirt phenomenon, is that what you're talking about?
We're gonna get to that, but that's part of it too.
Okay.
But I think it's the final girl is almost like the magical Negro, the one who survived, the one who shows, or oh man, they don't survive to the end, but the one who shows that if this Black person can last and go against this particular beast, then that beast must be, you know, aggressive or huge. So it's Black people, usually it's the Black men, they're depicted in these films, and they're fighting. They may not make it to the very end, but they have to last long enough to show that this beast must be very aggressive if they can beat a Black man.
Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead, he is the first example.
Yes, it's like, oh, the zombies must be real because, you know, but what was that?
He outlasted them like mess. I mean,
y'all, come on, you can do this. But if he was to be killed, which he wasn't, we'll talk about it in 2 seconds. But if he was to have been killed, it would show how aggressive those zombies are. One thing about that film, even when you talk about how he survived. So he survives the zombies. The zombies were cool, like, you know, well, not cool, but you get the point. But the zombies was like, yeah, okay, we see that this is serious here. You're winning here. He's not even killed by the zombies. He's killed by this white mom who thought he was a zombie. Like, and then, you know, one thing they talk about documentary is how it imitated the Jim Crow era.
Yes.
It really was like a part of this where, you know, being killed by this white mob, and that was the ending of the Night of the Living Dead. And it's just a very interesting conversation because, you know, thinking about how they did not see him as, they saw him so less or so little as a human that he could be killed like a zombie. Like they didn't see him as a real being. That's what I'm gonna say. They didn't see him as a real being, so they killed him as a mistake.
Yes, and it's almost like we know it's not a mistake though, because in a way he kind of takes on the sacrificial Negro, even though it's like we allowed you to stay through this whole movie all the way till the end. It was almost like we're teasing Black people to think, well, we're gonna keep him still alive. He fought all these battles. He saved us. He's gonna come out in the end victorious. You know, if you're watching it, sorry for the spoiler. If you're watching it, you're almost kind of like, we might win. You know,
Yeah,
you might actually got it. And then it happens. And then you're like, everything is crushed. You know,
right.
like you're the sucker that was given to you from the at the bank when they give you the can,
Mhm.
it's like they're snatching it away from you. Like, nope, you can't have it.
Exactly.
And that's like what happens in Night of the Living Dead. It is this
Yeah.
you're there. I mean, the fact that he's struggling, because it's not easy for him either. Let's keep that in.
Right.
And then to think like I put in all this work and then I still get taken out.
And that was the Black experience. Thank you.
Yes, it is the Black experience.
That
We
is.
put all this
That
work,
is the Black experience.
and then just like that, it's taken away.
Because again, the key thing was like struggle through the whole time to survive. Struggle to survive as much as possible. Killing zombies, protecting everyone around him as much as possible.
Yep.
He's not killed by the zombies. He almost made it. He was having a good time. Well, not a good time, you know, but he was surviving. And then to be killed because he's not considered human.
Right.
Or we thought he wasn't human. It was a mistake.
Yeah. I just, you know, we talked about this in other conversations where like I really feel I really don't feel like these are mistakes. These
No.
are not like, oh, oops, I didn't know. Nope, no. I'm not buying that anymore. There's too many things that have happened in life for this to be a oops type of thing.
Right. Come on. And actually, after the film was made, they sent the director was taking the film somewhere and he found out that MLK was assassinated. And it was like,
And the kind of what you feel after that, and you're like, it's like,
right.
huh, okay. Yeah, it makes you think differently. But yet and still, does things really change after that though? No. So even it was like a pause, a moment
It was
to,
a pause.
you know, of like, oh, but then these things still happen.
Right, it's still happening.
Genre of horror. It still happens in the genre of life. You know, like, so it's not like anything changed after that. It's, you know, it was like this pause to think, and then it was like, oh, okay, you know, keep it moving. So
Right. And that's the issue with, you know, not the issue, but some of the concerns, well, many of the concerns of the Black experience.
right.
Where, you know, we're struggling to survive, but then we could be taken out by racial violence, and it could be something that's unexpected. And so when you talk about experiencing our fears, it's that fear.
Right.
It's that survival fear, where we, even in the midst of our joys and celebrations, we are always mindful that we're still living in a racial environment, a racist environment, an environment supported by white supremacy. And we have to navigate those particular institutions every day. And so just like Dwayne Jones did in Night of the Living Dead, we have done that. We still have to do that. We're still talking about these things where we're working through it. We are saying we're going to focus on mental health. We're going to, you know, get our lives right. We're going to do all these different things. Yet the insidiousness of racism is that your life can be cut short
At any time.
at any time.
You don't know when.
You don't know when.
Timeline. There's no ETA.
There's no no ETA. There's no ETA.
You know,
Right.
it's almost like going back to when you asked what was my first encounter with horror, and I'm thinking about Freddy Krueger and like going to sleep and that fear, not wanting to go to sleep because I don't know what is going to be in my dreams. You know, to like, I don't want to walk out my door because I don't know today I'm gonna get pulled over or go for a jog if because somebody just was threatened by me.
Right.
You know, shoot me or run me down and then kill me.
Right.
Or in my home.
Right.
And shots come through and kill. Like these are things where regular, normal, what should be seen as normal day-to-day things happening, but yet that's when, you know, our lives are also being threatened in these normal. So yeah.
By accidents.
Right, accidents.
Accidents, some purposeful, but some accidental. Like I didn't know that, you know, this was the case. And, you know, that's the problem, is the accidents, as well as the purposeful actions that we are scared of.
And
Yes.
speaking of other purposeful actions, so you were mentioning about like directors and actors and
Yeah.
those who are actually being able to direct films. So it wasn't like we saw too many Black directors filming horror films,
Right,
and
right,
when
right.
we did, there was sometimes the struggle of how much control they had in the narrative and how much they could tell the story, and how much money, resources that were given to them.
Right, right.
They were given very minimal budgets to create what in many ways some of these are classics, Black,
Right, right.
I believe there wasn't really that much of a budget given for Tales from the Hood and Tales,
Right,
so these are things where money was not huge and running overflowing, but
right.
they were able to come up with these amazing narratives
Mhm.
to critique, to offer, commentary on what's happening in
Right.
everyday life. So it's commendable, even in the sad reality of what is given to them, that they still produce something amazing. And
Right. And it really speaks to why they saw an importance in doing this work, right? Where, yes, I do this because I'm interested in it as my craft, but let's talk about the Black story from a different perspective.
right,
Let's go into horror and see how we can use Blackula to talk about this Black experience. Not just this killer who goes for blood. Blackula was a complex character, a complex being. He was a full person, So even that idea of, that we're not gonna have this Black character just being scary.
right,
They tell stories. And that's what I love about horror film anyway, is that yes, it does cause fear and dread, but it's the story and why we have these movies. Again, going back to Tales from the Hood, one of my favorites, and will always probably be my favorite, is really excellent. The little vignettes and short stories. Oh my gosh. But even that didn't have a great budget, but the story was powerful.
right,
The fact that, again, we're going to talk about this later. I'm not trying to give away the storyline, but it's very important. But how the pastor was killed by the police officers, and then using the same horror genre, this horrific feeling, to come back as a ghost or a spirit and haunt the people and kill some of the officers and hunt the last Black officer. That was a great use of this fear. Well, in multiple ways, but it was a great use of how do we talk about vengeance?
right, right,
What does vengeance look like in a horror film?
right.
And it really, even though it's not about Black people going to do all these different things violently, it was like fear. What do we imagine that could happen in this particular realm, in this particular genre?
Yes. And it goes back to that another question that you asked right in the beginning, like how has horror been able to talk about Black history and the Black experience? And it's, even in just talking with you, I'm like, gosh, why are not more people talking about this and using horror to have these dialogues and have this conversation? And maybe it's the fear of what is within horror that scares people to want to talk about it, that they don't. But it's like you have this genius of a way, a vehicle to engage with so many different topics. And, yes, it invokes fear. And that's something sometimes we have to sit in that discomfort and
Right.
really, take that in. But then at the same time, what do we do with it to change that fear? How do we not be scared anymore? How do we change that narrative? And horror allows for it. Because as we said, horror is not necessarily always scary. It has its
it's not like jump scares like that. Yeah.
It has its times where you're laughing. Because there's many times where there's some horror films that I've laughed more than I was scared.
Yes. I agree with that. There's there's some commercials that scare me. Like it was one Facebook commercial, the meta anyway, but that was a fearful thing.
Wait, are you talking about that Geico commercial?
No, it's the meta. It's like when Facebook changed its name to Meta, and it was like some random creatures in this type of new thing.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? What is this? Because what scares me is this fear of this unknown in this way, right? But it's very interesting. I don't like the commercial, but I love the the effect of horror, like the horror has on different people. Look at it so you can see this fear, this rational fear. So I think it's a great genre for other people to see this fear, and also for us to feel validated, to see what's going on. Like, okay, this is exactly what we, thank you. This is what we experience. This is what we go through. It's almost like it's like a relief almost that we can get our experiences on TV that other people can really talk about it and start having these conversations, because that's the important part too. The conversation starters. When Get Out came out, it started so many conversations on race that we've been wanting to have for so long. It was like, oh, I love Get Out, I love Get Out. And then, you have to break through, what do you love about Get Out? Like, let's deal with that. And then you have to go through the symbolism of it. But it starts the conversations that, sometimes are hidden.
And it's able to, as they talk about in the documentary, able to provide the language that some people understand over besides other language. So it's sophisticated enough for particularly white audiences to really kind of look at themselves like, oh, I do that. Now they may not vocalize that and say that, but there's kind of like this internal thing going on, like where it's like, oh, I've said that, I've done that, I do that. Ooh, and so and he didn't have to like beat you.
No, he didn't have to do that.
Over the head with it. It was, very subtle things like that auction. It was subtle things of, the main.
It was a silent auction. That is silent auction.
The way in which you had the buck that was being used as a weapon. So the trope was now the weapon. You have the idea of, a guy saying subtle things like, yeah, I would have voted for Obama a third time. And how, like, I'm not laughing at that. I'm not like, oh, thank you. Like, that's not something where I'm going to give you a cookie for that.
Right. So, I think that is key. I think that is key, where it's like, it starts that conversation. It's not, like you said, it's not about this conversation like, I'm gonna call you out every 5 minutes. It was, let's talk about these things that are going on. And we all go through this type of reckoning, this awakening.
Yes.
We throw around woke every day, but we have to talk about this process of awakening. What is that like? And it really, we see how horror can start this process of awakening.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
And Get Out also, which, if we know it comes out in 2017. So if we think about what has happened prior to that and the films that have come out, and how the documentary speaks to this maturity that was very much needed in order for it to survive. So 2017, not too long ago, where you get this awakening of not only what's happening in society, but also within the horror genre, and how we have to tell the story differently.
Right.
And even Jordan Peele speaks to how he had control of how to end.
Yes.
It could have ended a numerous amount of ways.
Yeah.
It had the white savior to come in and save the day, or take out all the people. He could have went to jail. There's so many different ways that it could have ended, but it did. And I was, in a part of me, there was, I think, a relief.
Yes, the relief. It's like, oh my God, okay, he's all right. Because the thing is, we're so used to horrible endings. We knew he was gonna go to jail. We said, oh, he's gonna get killed too. All the above. And so again, just like when we talk about Tales from the Hood, I know I keep bringing it up, but it's the thing. And we're going to talk about, Ganja and Hess in a moment. This idea of redemption and, receiving justice. What does justice look like?
Right.
Because, justice doesn't always mean formal in a legal sense. What does justice look like? And you see these multiple depictions of justice in these horror films. And I am happy, like you said, that Jordan Peele decided, I'm not going to send him to jail.
Right.
I'm going to have his friend who had the intuition all along that something was wrong. And he went to everyone. He went to law enforcement. He went, hey, everyone, this is wrong. But because, racism was so normal, people were like, there's nothing crazy. But it was his intuition to say, let me check in on my friend. So it also speaks to Black collectivity.
Yes.
and how we check on each other, like we make sure we're all good because we see things that others may not.
Mm-hmm.
And that was power in that. And that's what saved the main character and Get Out.
Yep. And the reminding of, so you shouldn't be doing that. You
Right.
know,
Like
even though it wasn't like he was choking it down, putting it down his throat, but there was little nudges of, so this not how we operate. This ain't right.
Right. Like, why are you going down there and what's going on? You ain't driving. Like,
yeah. And these are realities. Once again, these are realities for Black people. Like,
yes,
we don't do these things.
We really don't.
Why are you changing the script?
Right, exactly. And that's the great thing about it. It's like, we don't do these things. Now, people can see why.
Yes.
This is why. Sometimes, people may think Black people are irrational. Why people may look at it like, oh, you're just being, thank you, Get Out. This is why. This is our fears on TV and television, so you can see it. And the thing is, the only person who was able to save him was his friend, his Black friend across his community.
A fellow Black person.
And even, matter of fact, throughout the whole time, it was we're not talking about Get Out, but throughout the whole time, it was the Black characters who was looking out for him and trying.
This is true. They were trying to tell him in many different ways.
Right.
Like with the maid, she was like, no.
That's my favorite scene.
No. And there's something about certain words, certain actions that go a long way. That speak, sentences. It's one word, but it speaks so many volumes.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, and there's, like I said, we got to give credit to these folks who are these masterminds of storytelling. Because you're like, yes, thank you. And we're particularly talking about film, but this is not also something that we don't see in other areas. So, we gotta, Tananarive is someone we brought up a lot, who is a very well-known horror writer. We got Nalo Hopkinson. You have, let's see who else, Jewel Gomez, several Black writers who are writing in the horror genre and, and sci-fi and thrillers who are telling these stories also. So, we got to make sure that we're, like I said, we're focusing particularly on film, but it's not like people aren't telling these stories in other ways.
Right, exactly. Because we've been trying to tell these stories. And one thing Toni Morrison has said, many times, it's important that we tell our story because we control our narrative. And so that is the role of the author, the director, the writer, the whoever. Like, it's the role of us to tell our stories, to truly depict our stories. Because again, she was like, we write for certain audiences. Yes, we get that. But it is key that we tell our true past and our true present and our true future, because it will not be done by any other group. We have to do that.
Yep.
So yeah, it's very interesting.
So, in addition to, a film like Get Out, Us, and some others that follow, which I'm going to get to, there was also that time period where Blaxploitation was kind of, experimenting with horror and, with films like Abby and Sugar Hill. And, it's important to note that as well, too, that other people were offering another lens at how we look at horror. And it's sometimes in a campy way, but in a way that goes back to a point you mentioned. Black people were being able to be employed.
That's it.
Black people had control because they were direct producers of this. So even in this campy, even in this like obnoxious ways in some cases, and some problematic, there was the opportunity where we were able to see Black faces present.
Right. And not just present, but in the whole thing. Like, we see the whole film is based, like, like we talk about Blackula, what's another one? Tales from the Hood, all these different things. But Blaxploitation, yes. The first movie that I saw from Blaxploitation was Sweetback's Bass.
Yes.
So.
That title, oh my God, that title.
Like,
Rest in peace, Melvin Van Peebles. So
yes, rest in peace. Perhaps I was too young to watch it, but I still think I'm too young to watch it.
I feel like I'm still.
I'm too young to watch it. It was a lot. But it was, Black people taking control of their narrative and really saying, we're sexual beings, we are who we are, but we're not always like this, but this is just a movie that we did. We're telling this story in this way. We own this story. And some people look at it as though it's a caricature of the Black experience. But again, even with Black experiences, it's multiple.
Right.
And it really fought against this respectability that we were just talking about. Like, hey, we're just having a fun film that should not be critiqued in, that respectability way. To me, again, the Sweetbacks movie, I'm just going to end there. That movie was, a lot. It was a lot. Mm-hmm. But even in its a lotness, it really showed like, hey, we are everything. And just like, white people can make movies and just be movies without the critiques, this is one of them. Mm-hmm. Like it is just a movie. You may not like it, but it put us on the screen. It gave us jobs. It allowed us to be creative in a new way. Right. And we did not have to live within the confines of respectability.
Exactly. It's, we're just acknowledging it. We're never saying that this is like our story or everybody's story. It's a part of the Black experience.
Yeah.
For some people, they will be able to relate to that. And that's a necessary thing for its existence. So, because, as we've said before, Blackness ain't monolithic.
No, it's not.
You gotta show all the spectrums.
Yes.
Black tales. So another film that came up in the documentary that I wanted to make sure we mentioned was The Craft and the ways in which Black women, the actress in there speaks to the importance of being able to see herself in that film and for future Black women and girls and teenagers to see themselves. And how, even though there was like pushing up against of what this actress portrayed and what she was as an actor, or excuse me, as a character, what her role was, it was just the idea of, she was saying she didn't get to see that when she was growing up. So
right.
Opportunity for her to offer a representation for other girls coming up to say, look, there was someone who was in a movie and she did witchcraft, and that's cool to me. And she's a Black, teenager. And
right.
It's so important now. I mean, there's so many things for us where we're like, yes, there's finally some representation, because we didn't have that. That was very minimal. So I think it's important to speak to that as well. The future and what's going to be the legacy, of this genre.
Mm-hmm. Like, even as we see these new movies coming out, you start to see more women show up. You start to see more women being main characters and not just an aside or a sidekick. And that to me is very empowering, one, because I love horror, and it'll be great to see me on the film, not a scary figure, but you get the point. Just being included in the document, in the shows. Because we have movies like Antebellum.
Yeah.
Which is part of this legacy, and you have Us, where you have a woman as one of the main characters, and a wonderful plot twist at the end of that movie. Wonderful plot twist. You also have, our favorite Lovecraft Country.
Yep, for sure. Which definitely presents Black women and girls in so many different, lights, and it's very much appreciated still.
Right.
Still not coming back, but that's another episode.
It's really sad because I was really looking forward to seeing what happened with Dee.
Yep. Because okay, let me not get too concerned.
Like, does she grow up? Like, who does she become? This, very creative young girl. Who does she become? Hippolyta, what happens to her? Now that she has become free in herself. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're not gonna get mad. We're trying not to anyway.
I'm getting my feelings. Then you have one of my faves, who I've got to introduce it to you, Kaniqua, Attack the Block, which brings in the diaspora and thriller, and one of John Boyega's very, very first films. And
Mm.
this was one of those kind of like sleeper films that I'm like, why do not more people know about this film? And so, yeah,
Like
with
me, I didn't know.
Attack the Block when we talk about the Girl with All the Gifts film. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for that.
Mhm.
Then you have some films or series like Them, which in all of its many layered ways works for some people
Yeah.
and doesn't work for others.
Yes.
It is a series that I'll put it like this, and you probably can tell how I feel about it is as how I'm talking about it. Um, it is a way to be able to continue the conversations about Black trauma.
Yeah.
However, may not be necessarily your cup of tea, but it offers another opportunity to engage with that and complicate the ways in which TV and film engage with Black trauma. And this was,
Right.
executive produced by a Black woman. It was also created by a Black man. So I'm going to give the kudos to that. The delivery and the way that it was put out there, it's not one that I have to repeat to watch again. I'll just say
Yeah.
that.
I think once is great.
Once is great.
I think it's excellent. I think Them is a very interesting series. It does speak about Black experience, Black trauma, like you said. And actually, one thing I will say, it caused me to, or led me to doing more research in California when Black people, I think it was Compton or
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
like I was interested in the integration of that neighborhood because of it. So at least, for me, it brought me to this point of, oh, I could do more work on that. I want to know more about this experience here. And it does call the conversation again. Like, yeah, it was a I would say there's different triggers there in this particular series, but it does, well, I guess not, but it's important to also understand that it does depict these different things in the Black experience that shows it on its face. It wasn't hidden. It was like, this is what Black people experience.
Yes.
And with that, I have to give it credit. But again, it's a bit strong.
It is.
And some people, take that and they may be triggered by it again, but it does really speaks to the role and the power of horror.
Right. And like I said, it's, I'll even dare to say a necessary series to really keep pushing how horror has to evolve and mature.
Right.
So because it brought in a lot of conversations, even about the church,
Yeah, yes, it does.
Even about, as you said, like gentrification and so forth, and just familyhood. And, I will also give kudos to the two young daughters in the series.
They did that.
Like they nailed that. I tell you, I was scared.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's not scared in the sense of blood and guts, but scared in the sense of like mentally what was happening. So,
and we also saw how the mother dealt with mental issues because of racism. And that the mental problem she dealt with was the fear that we were able to see.
Right.
So she was dealing with her own mental health concerns because she was like, I'm not giving it away, but there's some intense scenes that she experienced that really played her and affected her. And it really speaks of how some Black people go through this trauma and we carry it with us until we die. Like we still carry this type of racial trauma with us. So yeah.
Like I said, what I can also say, it adds to the canon of, these new horror, TV shows and films, and how, we want to continue to see the genre thrive.
Yeah.
And to come up with different ways to do that. So, we just only gave you all a few. There's many, 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 many more. Hence why we wanted to take a whole season to dive into it. So, the legacy and the future of Blackness and horror, I think, is far from over. And
right.
It's on the rise.
Absolutely. It's definitely, I think as more people really understand what the horror genre is, because people keep thinking it's just, not people, well, people of course, but not a lot, but you have people thinking that it's just jump scares.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be scared. It's important that, yes, you will be scared. but it's important that you know the story in this particular in these films. Like watch the story or pay attention to the story.
Yep.
You know, and really understand what the fear is. What are you scared of?
Exactly. Exactly.
Understand what you're fearing in this movie and talk about that.
So, you know, when it's all said and done, I'm going to say I definitely want to recommend people check out Horror Noir, you know, the documentary. If nothing else, it allows you to give you that entry point, you know, introduction into Blackness and horror, and even just horror as a whole. So it's a really good starting point for those that maybe are too scared, pun intended, to dive into some of these movies. You know, this gives you kind of like the outside take into it. You can drive around the parking lot a little bit before you get your parking space. And like I said, it was just the setup and the style. It was in a theater. They were actually in a theater watching the clips and talking to each other. It made me want to know more, as you said. I wanted to dive into some of the films, and I was like, I hadn't heard of that one. I need to go check that out. Or I didn't know about that scholar that wrote it, or that this guy directed it, and he's still alive, still doing other things. So
exactly, yeah. And it even goes into our conversation on Ganja and Hess. Right? You know, I would say you can watch Ganja and Hess. I don't think that, well, I don't know, because fear is, you know, people feel it differently.
Yeah.
So it's a horror film indeed, but the fear is different. It's not the jump scare. And so, you know, you have Ganja and Hess, which is one of the original Black horror films.
Right.
And it actually came out during a time where people may consider it Black exploitation.
Yes, yes.
Right?
If you were to talk to Bill Gunn or listen to some of his interviews, he would tell you very adamantly, so this was not a Blaxploitation film, not at all. It was not intended to be, and is not as such. If you were to Google it, as I did, just to kind of get some, additional information, it's identified and labeled as Blaxploitation horror. And just like I said, hearing his interviews and how he was very intentional about the story that he was wanting to tell, it's important, the labels that are given, because then assumptions are also attached to that. Blaxploitation, there's already certain ideas and thoughts that you have. I mean, it's just what it is. It's natural. But I'm glad that he's been able, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he was able to relay that and speak to that so that it's on the record.
That is key. And yet it's still, with it being on the record, people still grouping the movies together. And that's the thing is too, like all the horror genre is not homogenous amongst Black people. Horror noir is not homogenous. It's nuanced and multiple. So even when you think about, or even just Black film, Black film is not all, the same. It's about the Black experience, yes, but it's not all the same. And so when you see Blaxploitation, you think of sex and sexuality, sex and life, right? Again, with that film is a great example. But then when you see this one, you do see there are sex scenes in it. There are multiple, but it was still not Blaxploitation.
Right.
So we have to be critical of how we categorize movies as well. And we have to be critical of how people review these movies. It's multiple. So again, like he said, it's not Blaxploitation. Yes, we have sex in it, but not every Black movie with sex is Blaxploitation.
Right. I would describe it as a film, as an experimental horror film. That's how I would describe it. Now, whether he described it, but I think that's a more accurate depiction.
I would take that.
I also point out, he directed it, wrote it, and even starred in it. Bill Gunn, that is. So,
he did. Yeah.
In 1973, that's a huge accomplishment, considering films of that nature were not even and like that in that sort. So
exactly, well done. Like it was good. It was a good film. I could see experimental horror, and you also said it was a mental thriller.
Yeah, because it gets you thinking there about certain things. Because as we see, like with a film like Get Out, Eve's Bayou, some others, like you said, they're not that jump scare, but they're scary in other ways. Like you can
Yes,
scare people, through a variety of different ways. And I feel like Ganja and Hess definitely deviates from, you know, and I'm not even going to say typical or traditional, from the way that people often categorize horror. So
right. Did you see the Sweet Blood of Jesus? Did you ever see it?
I have not. It's on my list to see, and so I heard about it, and I remember because it was funded by a Kickstarter. So I remember
Oh,
hearing how it came to be, and it's essentially there's parts where it's almost mirrored to Ganja. Hess. So yeah, I'm curious to, especially now after watching Ganja and Hess,
right.
wanting to check it out, and I'm glad that we watched it because I've mentioned it so many times, and people have mentioned it to me,
Yes.
and I kind of just, in that moment was just kind of like, yeah, yeah.
Right, you're right. It was good. Yeah, that was good. That was good.
So now I can actually have some conversation and some complete dialogue about it.
Yes, exactly. We can really just say, no, I remember that scene.
Yep.
Yes, they did this. Because you're right. We'd be like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that movie, yeah.
Or when people drop it as this film in horror that you gotta see, and you're like, yeah, I know, right? Like everybody keeps talking about it. It's like, it's like I can now really engage with it fully. Yes.
Yes. Because I mean, it is a great film to, in experimental horror genre. It is a great film to start discussing, because one thing that you brought up before in our conversation is this journey of a Black man.
Yes.
Like, you have this one man who was actually Dwayne Jones, and we'll talk about that in 2 seconds. But you see through this particular character, this main character, this victim, the survivor, and then this person who lets it go.
Right.
And so through this whole thing, he is stabbed. He's a victim by this magical African knife that makes him immortal, but he feeds on blood. But again, it's not a vampire movie because it's not a typical vampire movie. Again, Gunn is saying, I'm looking at this differently.
Yeah.
So he was stabbed. And then, how does he survive? He has to feed on different people. And yes, through that, he's having, sexual relations with different people and killing them and drinking their blood. Like it's tied together.
Yes.
And then, at the end, how he lets it go. How he lets it go. How he decided to go to God. And we'll talk about religion also as part of this particular film. But he goes to church and dies.
Right.
He made that choice. And so
someone makes a mistake and it takes him out. So
because yeah, you're right. The mistake killed him then, and he did not have a choice over the ending of his life. But this one, he chose to end his life. So you see this different ending, like this empowered ending, where it's like I have control over who I am, what I choose to do with my life. Right. And another question I want to ask is, that comes up in this discussion, what is the cost of letting go? What is this cost of freedom? Because he lets go, but his letting go is death.
Yeah. And for many, I think that, that letting go was he's able to be free from all of the things that he's had to deal with. And so when we say all of the things that he's had to deal with, so this is a Black wealthy man who lives by himself.
But what's his occupation? Like, what's his field? What's his field?
He's an anthropologist.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of things that he's struggling with. You're struggling with this identity of being, an erudite, of being a wealthy man who owns a mansion in New York. And if you're familiar with Westchester, New York, it's quite affluent. And so he's dealing with having this high status, being a Black man and having this high status. And so, you see where when he becomes immortal, I think a part of him, it works, but then a part of him is like, oh, this is a change that I don't know how long I can live with this.
Right.
And so, it's like I've had all these things, and maybe I had these things to prove to someone else, to prove to everyone else, but I need to let that go.
Right.
And, and maybe the fact that him getting stabbed was the opportunity and the gateway, the door to open to be able to let go.
Right, right.
So, as you said, he chooses it on his terms. Like, okay, I can no longer operate like this. I can no
Right.
longer live like this, and this is not good for me. So I
Right.
need to, be saved. I need to be free from all of this,
Mhm.
and it's time. And where I'm going to do it is I'm going to go back to this church, and I'm going to, is in a way, kind of like when people give themselves, to
Yeah,
the
you lay it on the altar. Yeah. Mhm.
and that's, essentially kind of what he did. And he had, you don't really see too much of him, but kind of a spiritual guide in a way of his limo
Yeah.
driver, who happens to also be a minister, who is, kind of helps aid and guide that direction of
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, sometimes we think the cost is this bad thing, but I
Mhm.
think for Hess Green, Dr. Hess Green, in this situation, that freedom was like, I've done my time, and I
Yep.
think it's time for me to let go and release and be free with wherever he goes,
Mhm.
whether it's with the ancestors or whether it's with someone else.
Right, right.
Yeah, and just the fact that he had the control to say when he wanted to do that is, I think, a
Right.
really powerful thing within this horror genre.
Absolutely. And even how, like you said earlier about voodoo and, Black women specifically and voodoo being condemned, in this particular film, you see Christianity as this uplifting this God. When, Christianity in the Black church is an important part of the Black community. And so, like you said, there was this, since the beginning, at the beginning, the song was, I Know It Was the Blood.
Yes,
And,
yes,
we usually sing that during communion.
right.
Right. Hey, that's like the song. And so we're opening with this religious symbol already with this song. And then, throughout, we hear, different religious conversations or speeches. Then at the end, him ending up in church. And even at the very end, the kids singing.
Yes, it opens and ends with it.
It opens and ends with religion. And it's like, in the Black community, religion has been the saving space and grace.
Right.
And so it has been a place for activism, any type of political work has started in the Black church, community work, as well as spiritual work. Politically, socially, and spiritually, the Black church has been a home for Black people. It has been the cornerstone of the Black community.
Right.
And so throughout this, even as he was going through his own struggles, the backdrop of his story has been religion.
It has. Mm-hmm.
And it has been the church, the pastor that has helped, like you said, guide him throughout this whole story. Even as he was doing all these different things, trying to figure out who he is, and is this the life worth living?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I have to struggle like this, if this is so much right now, yes, I, upper class, wonderful, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm great, but, dealing with all these other layers of struggle, is it worth it?
Right. And
Am
I
I-
think we have to even deal with, like, we did try to balance having the privileges that we have.
Right.
So both of us having PhDs,
Mhm.
both of us being Black women, both
Yep.
of us, we like to step outside the academy and enjoy the lives of what that is. And,
Yeah.
how do I balance being this scholar professor, but
Mhm.
someone who enjoys comics, or for
Right.
you, this scholar professor who enjoys horror? Like these are, some people might not see that as a mix. Like, how does that work? And
Right.
for your friends who may not have the same privileges, that
Mhm.
look at you differently. Oh, well, you're that professor, but I'm
Mhm.
just still Grace too. Like,
Like, what? I came home just to enjoy life. I'm not even talking about this right now. And so I want to go to another point. It goes back to isolation
yes,
and how, you're around people who don't understand what you're going through,
right,
who don't know your experiences. It's so many different things tied to this this one concept. So it's like, what does it mean to only be the one like you and where you are?
yeah,
And so you see that one as, there's not a lot of Black people in these different fields. And, I'm in anthropology. And so we're emerging. Yes, we have multiple here, but it's like, what is that feeling to be isolated of like only one of 10 or one of 20? And then, go ahead.
real quick, he makes a point about something that you're saying,
Mhm.
because he was saying, if something happens to meet the only Black man that lives out here, there's going to be a problem.
Right.
Police are coming in. It's going to be an issue here, you know, as he was talking to his assistant. So I think goes to your point, you know, about like all having to deal with all this.
Yes.
What that means. So yes, go ahead.
They have to, no, you're right, like having to carry all this. And then, you know, even when you go to your own community, the Black community, and you're like, you know, your family, your home.
Right.
And it's like you're separating that because now you have this PhD.
Right.
And you're like, no, I'm just Kaniqua, I'm just enjoying my life. And so in this film, you see this isolation. He's a doctor, wonderful anthropologist again. But you know, after being stabbed and how he was separated from who he was at first, like he's different now. And no one understands this but his butler. And does he know that did we ever get the answer? Does he know that he has special powers?
So it's never really said, like he never really speaks to it. He very much knows his place of where he is. He's like, this one, I don't exit outside of things that are not in my control. I don't know what that is. I don't deal with that. I don't go in places where I'm not supposed to go. So he's in his box. And
okay. Because even in isolation, he has someone who understands him, I guess.
Yeah.
But I want to go to one scene. I just need for you to just maybe you can remember. You remember when he was at the table with Ganja? They both were at the table. And Ganja was like, I'm mad because you didn't tell me you were like this, right? Or you killed my husband, fine. And so then, you get the point. But at the table, he was getting ready to get up and do something. And then the butler came and was like,
yes.
Like, was he getting ready to threaten Hess?
I don't know. That's good. Because he would appear oftentimes very randomly.
Yes.
And he would linger sometimes. And I was like, okay, you can go now. Like, we good. Like, thank you. I got my food. I'm eating. You can leave. Right. He was just in very random moments at random times. And he would talk. So it wasn't like he was silent.
Right, which I appreciate. He wasn't a silent butler.
Not at all. Not at all. And would also matter of fact you in a minute. Because when Ganja asked him, how did you get here? And he was like, I came with the house. so before you start asking all these questions,
you need to calm down.
Before you came here, before he came here, let's get that straight. Essentially, he's saying, before Dr. Hess got here, before you got here, I was here.
Right, and I'm going to stay here.
And we'll be here. So
I'm going to look at that scene again because I really think that because Hess was going to stand up and he was right there. He was like, he was. Are you about to go somewhere? Or
I need to do something? You need your key?
Because clearly needs some water. Because I think that's what happened. But we'll go back to that. But I really, again, with the butler, we just talked about isolation, but it's good to know he had this butler there who understood, but without being nosy.
Yes, yeah.
He has own autonomy, but yeah, he was there to help.
Right.
And I will say Hess respected him for that.
Yes, which goes against many of the stereotypes that we were already seeing with other films of that time and even before and even afterwards. Even though, yes, he was a domestic, I never saw him really as kind of, even as a domestic. In a way, he just seemed someone who lived at the house also, that just happened to be the butler, you know. But yeah, which was, like I said, one of the many tropes or stereotypes that was disrupted.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Hess is a anthropologist who has a lot of antiquities and art and was able to throw parties. You know, these are things that were were unheard of. We didn't see that, especially not in the 1970s and 1973.
Right. So that was very powerful. Because like you're right, that butler, he was like a person. And, you know, again, when we talk about people and their jobs, we have to separate the two. It's not their condition, it's their job. And he was performing his job, but he was a whole person. It was like, I have a personality, I have my own perspective, I am a whole person myself. So that was very, very empowering. And, again, going back to even the mental health angle, or, conversation of mental health, that was important in this particular film. That's why, the whole thing of how he was stabbed in the first place.
Right.
His assistant was going through something.
Yeah, he was about to commit suicide.
Yeah, that was the thing.
On a tree with a noose.
So the noose was here, he was sitting on a tree, but he wasn't visible.
At all. Nope. The noose, though, was very visible.
Very pronounced. But he didn't hang himself.
He didn't.
He did
but
not.
I think even that was a message of this could have went one way, but Gunn decided, nope, I'm not going to give y'all that. Because that might have also been the expected.
Yeah.
To hang himself with this noose, and be able to attach that to the lynching, and that, there's so many different things brought in with that. But he said, "Nah, I'm going to show you. I'm going to focus in on the noose.
Yeah,
it's not going to be used." And
right
on it. So I think that was actually pretty smart. Now that we talk it out even more, I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I see what you was doing.
I'm not going out. We're not going out that way. I'm not even gonna be a part of this scene. This is not me. Because again, even by the noose, he wouldn't have control.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Now, something that I'm gonna ask you, as we were talking about it after we watched, you had brought up about Ganja's character and her personality and the way that she was represented in this film. So you had brought up about the Jezebel trope.
Yeah.
Tell, what was it that kind of for you made you kind of signal that?
I think, because even after that conversation, I had to reflect back on it, but I was thinking, how quickly she and Hess got together, even though her husband was like going through a lot, and was like immediately, she was very sexualized in this, and, and not only, well, I don't know what she was doing with her husband, but when she came, she immediately like attached on to Hess.
Yes.
I was like, girl, calm down, step back like 3 notches. You came in from wherever you were and you stayed in his house while you were trying to figure out what happened to your husband. I don't know if it was Jezebel or it was just trifling, but either way, it was just like, that whole conversation of how she immediately got on to or attached herself to Hess.
Right.
And, even how she was sexual in that nature. But then, just like you said to me, and you could talk about a bit more about her being empowering.
Yeah. And so, because as we think about these tropes and the way that they're used and placed on people, I had to kind of like dig a little deeper, like, well, maybe this is just her, showing her sexuality and owning it. And, because it's easy, it would have been easy to put her in the category of this sexual being.
Right.
Like I said, as we just said, this film came out during the Blaxploitation era. So it was real easy to say, oh yes, she was this flaming, high sexuality, all of that. But maybe it was more like she was just confident in herself, and that's how she carried herself.
Right.
And is that wrong? Or should we be looking at her in that sense because of that?
I don't, because even when we reflect on that, I do agree with that, where it's like, we put her in there with Blaxploitation, but she really was not in that sweetback type Blaxploitation or other films. I'll keep talking about sweetbacks, but there's other films. But she definitely was empowered by it. But even when she found out, she saw her husband in the fridge.
Yeah.
She was mad for 2 scenes.
And that's giving her a lot, actually.
It was. And then she said, bet, let's get married. Like, what?
But which speaks to, she was already done with him beforehand.
To be done and want someone to go somewhere is one thing. To be done and you find he was killed is another emotion.
It is. And there's no way that I can even begin to know how she felt. But obviously, she felt enough that she was shocked.
Yes.
She had a moment of clutch the pearls. She had her moment where she, puts it out there. Why didn't you tell me that my husband was in this wine cellar or wherever, freezer? and she didn't get no answer. She also didn't push for an answer, which, like I said, further led me to, she was done. She was done. Like,
That's a different done level. You was done. You're like, I don't care if he's dead. Like, ma'am, take a step back. Like, but I mean, she was mad that he and Hess didn't tell her.
yeah, and that's what it was. It wasn't even about like,
It was communication error.
it was communication. It really was. It was like, so we're just not really gonna have this conversation about, or you're just not gonna tell me that my husband has been dead since I got here. Like,
And
he's
he
been
was
dead
like, what?
a couple days. You know? So but yeah, so I mean, even Ganja is just her coming in. She was very much like, I'm who I am. This
Right,
is
she was.
what you're gonna get. And even when the butler like talks to her in a particular type of way, she, you know, it was like, okay, you know, but I'm gonna still ask you these questions. And
Right,
she said, I'm gonna still want to know. I'm gonna still ask you this. I'm gonna still do this. And which
right,
I was like, you know what? I can't be mad at her for being forthright. That
right,
may
right.
be my take on it or my attitude, but hey, that's you know, so, and I think in a way it's given her a sense of power,
Right.
um that's usually taken away because
Mhm.
of her actions. So
And the thing is, when she came in the scene, he asked her, not in the scene, in the film, at the dinner or whatever, he asked her, what do you want? She
yeah.
said, money.
Yep.
I want money.
And
And
I
so even, go
mad
ahead.
at,
You can't get mad at that. You're like, she made it clear what she want. She didn't hide it. She said, I want money. And what is beautiful is how, I guess if you could say beauty in the story, but at the end, how she's the last one standing with all the wealth that belonged to him.
yep. And so
Because they
she
were married.
what she wanted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In any way she got it, she still got it. So she was able to do that because, again, like I said, she was married. So now everything that he had belongs to her.
Exactly.
And so even when Hess found his freedom, she found hers because all she wanted was money.
Yep.
And she got her ending she desired, where she can have control over the men she would like, because maybe she couldn't have control over, you know, the assistant in the way, and they didn't have much money. But now she has money and she can choose who she wants to be with.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
You know, this just you know, as we reflect further on it, you know, Ganja has definitely offers another take on how we can, you know, talk about horror, how we
Right.
talk about mental health, how we talk about survival, letting go, how we talk about addiction
Yes.
and the role that that plays,
Mhm.
how we talk about, you know, where do I want to, you know, lead my life,
Right.
where do I want to be
Mhm.
in the end. And so, you know, I will say, although there were many drifting narratives, as we talked,
There were. There were.
jumps, it still, in a way, came together in the end.
Yes, it did.
Said about the church, you know, where he comes back, you know, where we see the kids singing at the end. And it was, so there was still the closing, even with all of the shifts,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
happening. So, yeah. Oh, another interesting fact. So the guy who plays the preacher, Sam Wayman, is actually the brother of Nina Simone. Would find that out. So that was an interesting thing to find out. He's also worked with Bill Gunn in several other films, even outside of Ganja and Hess. So little known history, Black history fact for you.
That was good. That was good.
So
Okay, last question.
yes.
Why did he hide the assistant in the fridge when the assistant committed suicide?
Well, it goes back to that point where I mentioned, if there is another Black man dead in this house, in this island or this area, it's gonna be some, as they said, some smoke in the city. Because I'm like, so there was only one Black man here. How did this Black man get here? Why did he die? How did he die?
Yeah,
I'm sure it wouldn't end well for Dr. Hess.
no, we're not.
You know, he's still a Black man at the end of the day.
And he was still a scholar and in the academic institution, so he had several things, going for him.
So there was a lot of things that could potentially be taken away from him too.
Mm-hmm.
So as odd as it was that he was in this freezer, you know, that he put his assistant in the freezer, I mean, I think it was a protection.
Yeah.
His own self. Like, I gotta make sure I keep what's mine. And if they find this body or even hear about it,
Yeah.
that might be it for me. My
That's
credibility is gone. My notoriety, my license, if he had a license, there's so many things
yeah.
that could have happened. So, then it makes me wonder, does anybody else find the body or does Ganja get rid of it? Who knows? So who knows?
Right. Right.
But yeah, so, whoo, yeah. So needless to say, we got
Yes.
2 films on y'all docket for you all to check out. Definitely recommend both. We will be providing a resource page for you all that will follow the episode so that, each episode we're going to drop you some things, as well as we got to give a thanks to Auburn Avenue, who does a
Absolutely.
great
Thank
job
you.
of offering resources and for offering us this platform to
Absolutely.
talk to you all. So make sure you tune into those. Make sure you tune into our next episode, which, what are we going to be talking about, Dr. Robinson?
Candyman.
Both of them, not just.
I'm really excited. Like, that's gonna be amazing.
Yes. So I remember both of us talking about the second Candyman and how we were wondering when it was going to come, and it finally came, and it was not to disappoint.
It was not this point, but it took some time.
It took some time, but it didn't disappoint nonetheless in that time. But
Right.
all in all, we're so glad to be back.
Yeah.
We can't wait to talk to you all again about Candyman, both of them. We hope you all enjoy this episode. And this is just a taste of Dr. Robinson's humor, not humor, excitement about horror. And you're going to get more and more of it. So yeah, get ready.
Please.
So, any closing thoughts from you, Kaniqua?
Closing thoughts. One thing I would say, everyone, as we go through the series and even outside the series, I suggest you just check out some great horror films on your own. And yes, I know it can be scary. I think it's just very important that look for the stories in these films. If they're not good stories, just change it. But look for the stories in these films because they're telling their own narrative. And so again, I love horror. And I wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in with us. It's been amazing. I'm enjoying my time because I'm talking about my favorite genre of films. And so I look forward to so much more.
Yes.
So much more.
I do too. So y'all make sure y'all come back for another episode of Conversations with Beloved and Kindred. Till the next time.